Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I have a video today that I think is extremely valuable for any YouTube creators out there looking to have better thumbnails and titles. And that's because I stumbled across multiple threads that MrBeast has gave thumbnail and title advice to on Twitter. And the first of these I found while I was scrolling for information about MrBeast riddle. I was trying to solve it just for fun, looking for information on his Twitter page, but I actually came across this tweet from Yes Theory that MrBeast ended up responding to. In this thread, MrBeast gives valuable advice to Yes Theory on how to create better thumbnails and titles for a recent video they actually asked for thumbnail advice on Twitter. Casey Neistat responded, and MrBeast responded to that. It also reminded me of a Colin and Samir thread where they also asked MrBeast for thumbnail advice. And I think these two threads have extremely valuable advice for any creators out there, and we can learn a lot from them. Just to prove to you how valuable this information can be, Yes Theory actually tweeted out a picture of their analytics from this video that they got advice on Twitter yesterday, thanking MrBeast and Casey Neistat for their help on this. And as we can see in this tweet, in 4 days they got almost 2.1 million views, and it is their best performing video out of their last 10. And I actually did see earlier it was in number 14 on trending 2 days after it was posted. So these tips can be extremely valuable. I have 8 tips that I've pulled from these two threads for every creator out there to help them. So I wanted to start off in the Colin and Samir thread first. I think there's some good information there that applies to both threads that we'll see later. So if we look at this thread first, Colin Samir first tweet asking MrBeast for help on their left picture or their right picture of them creating a video about how MrBeast is going to be the first YouTube billionaire, which it's a really great video. If you haven't seen it, I'll link it in the description below. But MrBeast does respond right away to that, says the right picture is better, but he'd blur the background a bit more, move him to the right so his head is closer to the edge because it's wasted space. And that comes to my first highlight. Don't waste any space on your thumbnails. As we can see in this picture, MrBeast is pretty close to the edge of the thumbnail, but he recognizes that that little bit of space is still wasted. So he says to move the head over to the right, make the money and the text bigger because that's the focal point. And so that's advice number 1, don't waste any space. Highlight number 2 I gathered from this is don't have any distracting backgrounds on your thumbnails. You want the focus to be up front. As MrBeast says here, blur the background a bit so that he and the money is more in focus. Those two are exactly what MrBeast says in his response. Blur the background so he's more focused and move him to the right so there's no wasted space here. Use the new space to make the money and text bigger. So at the time of this recording, Colin and Samir have 830,000 views on this video, which is significantly better than other views that were on their channel before this. They do get quite a few in the 100K range, but this is far exceeded what their normal videos get, which is pretty great to see. So those are the two main highlights I pulled from the Colin and Samir thread. If we jump over to the Yes Theory thread, it has much more conversation and a lot more highlights that I pulled from that. Similar to the Colin and Samir tweet, Yes Theory tweeted out, which thumbnail would you click on? They give 2 examples. This one with Thomas up front with the biosphere in the back, and then this one with Thomas looking towards the biosphere and it's more unfocused. They tweeted this out, didn't really tag anyone in specific, but the first highlighted response to that is from Casey Neistat, and it says, you gotta MrBeast this one. Use clean shot of the biodome, fill the frame with it, then put you with a shocked face over it. Then just do whatever MrBeast says. The video's too interesting to go soft on the thumbnail. From Casey's response, since he tagged MrBeast actually saw this and responded. The interesting stuff is too far away, which leads us to highlight number 3. Keep the interesting stuff at the forefront of your thumbnail. As I mentioned with point number 2, you want to blur the background or make it non-exciting and keep all the focus stuff in front. So highlight number 3, keep the stuff in the forefront that is interesting and focus on whatever it is that is interesting. So if we look at MrBeast's response to Casey, he says, the interesting stuff is too far away. He selected the picture of Thomas looking at the camera but says it's too far away. And then He also says that the bottom 50% of this image doesn't add anything. So this goes back to point one, don't waste any space. So Mr. Beast is saying the bottom 50% doesn't really add anything. It's just a bunch of green trees. His face is valuable, as we'll see later. Mr. Beast also goes on to say that he'd argue that Thomas's face is good enough recognition for Yes Theory. He's one of the main people on Yes Theory, so I think that is a good point as well, and they don't need to have their logo on there. And then this last sentence in this response leads us to point number 4, which is that he says he'd rather just make the face bigger because people's eyes are naturally drawn to faces. So point number 4 here is to use your face or use someone's face because faces draw people's eyes. If you're scrolling down through YouTube and you see a thumbnail with someone's face on it, it's going to be a lot more intriguing to click than just a beautiful landscape would be. So point number 4 is use faces. Point number 5 here, and the last one for thumbnails, would be to maintain some brand consistency. So Mr. Beast says here that Thomas's face is good enough for brand recognition. They don't need their logo on there, but I have seen other content creators use logos on their thumbnails to maintain consistency across the brand, or they use the same type of font. I think another good example of this is Colin and Samir. If we go back to their tweet, in their 2 examples, they both have this black text with a yellow black background, so it's really up front and you see where it is. Even the one that they highlight, the people are also highlighted in this yellow shadow, kind of pops them off the screen. And then the black text is once again popped off the screen as well with a yellow background. So I think this is good brand consistency, and you want to keep those throughout the thumbnail. So when someone sees that in their timeline, they know that it's one of your videos and they don't have to look at the profile itself to know that. So now on to the title advice. As we get farther down in this thread, this title advice comes up too. So the next response that Mr. Beast gives says maybe you should title it I Explored instead of Exploring. It makes it much more believable and works really well for whatever reason. So the takeaway from this response is that try and make your titles more personal. I Explored instead of Exploring makes it more personal for the viewer, and if they see your face and understand that they want to go on a journey with you instead of just seeing you explore somewhere. So I Explored makes it more personal and the viewer is more likely to click on it. That's point number 6, and the first for titles is to make titles personal if you can. Mr. Beast goes on to say, I don't know if it's abandoned, but abandoned would hit harder than forgotten in his opinion. If it was to say abandoned, then the user is curious. So point number 7 from this video is to make your titles intriguing. As Mr. Beast says here, abandon is much more intriguing than forgotten. Someone just forgets something that's not too intriguing, but if it's abandoned, that makes it more intriguing because it's kind of an unknown, and that makes someone want to see it, so they want to see what it's like now that it has been abandoned. In this case, the biosphere was not abandoned, so Yes Theory didn't use that advice. But this is a good advice, so if you're creating your thumbnail and title, make it so that it is intriguing to the user and makes them want to click on it, which is the whole reason they're there in the first place. So if we keep scrolling down this video a little bit more, we get some more responses from Mr. Beast. Yes Theory responds with this picture of Thomas in the forefront, a little bigger, biosphere still in the back, but it is in focus this time and does lead to some intrigue of what that thing is in the background. And so Yes Theory responds with this and says, what do you think? Mr. B says, I like it a lot. Still a lot of dead space, but I know it's hard because of how weirdly shaped the buildings are. Maybe find a way to add forgotten back in the title or something else intriguing. And then he goes on to say, do what you think is best and on brand. Don't let me influence you too much. So the on brand part here, once again, goes back to point 5 that I made. Make sure that your titles and thumbnails are consistent throughout your brand, and so that a viewer will see them and recognize that it's you. But then he once again responds to his own tweet and shows a picture of a title here and says, this title is under 50 characters and seems really intriguing to me. And the title he puts out is I explored a $200 million forgotten space colony. And he uses a site here that gives you characters and words and spell checks, which I actually found to be very useful. I went and found this, and I'll link that in the description below as well. So you want to keep your titles below 50 characters because that's what will show up on mobile. I found a good resource here online that gives a breakdown of how many characters actually show up in your titles. And so I'll link this in the description below. It's from the socialvideoplaza.com. I have no association with them, but I found this table to be very helpful. The main goal here is basically just to keep it below 50 characters because that's what shows up on someone's home page on mobile. And that's where most people view YouTube these days. Some other spots it does go down to 45 or 40. And so if someone goes to your channel, then it's below 40, or if it's in YouTube search, it's below 45. But most people click through videos on the recommended page or that are recommended to them, which would just need to be below the 50 characters as Mr. Beast mentions here. So those are the 8 takeaways I got from these Twitter threads. I'll link them in the description below if you want to read through them as well. Once again, the takeaways are no wasted space, no distracting backgrounds, put the interesting stuff in focus, use faces because they are intriguing to people. 5 is to maintain brand consistency. 6 is to make the title personal. 7 is to make the title intriguing. And 8 is to keep your title below 50 characters because that's what shows up on mobile. So if we want to look at how these are put in practice, let's look at Mr. Beast's YouTube channel. His latest video at the time of this recording was I ate the world's largest slice of pizza. And we can see here Mr. Beast has a shocked face, so we have a person. We have the focus is this giant piece of pizza, which is extremely intriguing. And then the background is a kitchen, but it's blurred out. And then making the title personal, I ate instead of just eating. Because it's the world's largest slice of pizza, I think that is intriguing in and of itself. And it is short so that it shows up on mobile. I think that's a great example. We have more. I bought the world's largest firework. You have a giant firework and a surprise Mr. Beast. He broke into a house. It's basically just a picture of him climbing through the window of a house. So his most popular video here is I put 100 million Orbeez in my friend's backyard. And this is just a picture of tons of Orbeez and Mr. Beast sitting in the middle, kind of stuck up to his shoulders, which in and of itself is extremely interesting. One of my favorite thumbnails from Mr. Beast is his one where he gives strangers credit cards. So it's this little girl grabbing a credit card. I think that one kind of encapsulates everything we said here. So it's a little girl reaching for the credit card. There's no wasted space here because the girl is as far left as she can be. Basically, this credit card is on the right. Number 2 is to not have a distracting background. This one's just a tile floor, which doesn't take away at all. 3 is to keep your focus in the front, so the credit card is the closest thing to the camera that you can see. You can see the person handing the credit card to the girl, and the girl's face is super intriguing. Something interesting about this, and kind of goes against point 5 that I mentioned earlier, is it doesn't have Mr. Beast in it, and doesn't really have anything related to his brand. But I think the girl here is so intriguing. Her face is so excited and she's taking a credit card. That is intriguing enough that he didn't feel like he needed his face on this thumbnail. If we go to the title recommendations, he made it personal by saying I gave. And then the whole video itself is intriguing in and of itself because he gave his credit card to random people because, like, who would do that besides Mr. Beast? But that's intriguing. And then it's less than 50 characters, again, so that it'll show up on mobile. So I think these just show you, yes, Theory's result of having almost 2.1 million views in a little over 4 days shows you how powerful these recommendations can be. They didn't follow all of the recommendations to a T because there was still some blank space, but they did what they could. If this video was helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up. Helps other people see it and helps other people find my channel. Leave a comment and let me know what your recommendations are for having better thumbnails and title, or if something I missed that you think I should have included. And subscribe to the channel as well if you're not already, so you can see the future videos I make. So thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.